from the very beginning, I had visions of opening my own restaurant. Like I knew, and I've always been pretty ambitious, and I knew that was going to end up being the direction. And I'm smart enough to think, like when I'm 24 or 25, that a restaurant's probably not going to happen next year. That I needed to start laying the foundation, setting the stones and in place to make it to that.
So you had this realization when you were about 24 years old?
Oh yeah.
And then how old were you when you opened your first restaurant?
32.
32. So 8 years of living intentionally to lay that foundation. What does that look like?
Well, it was learning all the skills that I needed to, becoming a better chef, using the kitchens as a laboratory, and it's instead of protecting myself from the things that I wasn't particularly good at, it was instead exposing myself to the things I wasn't particularly good at, with the idea that hey, when my name is at the bottom of the paycheck, I can't have this restaurant fail, right? I need to make sure that I can do all of the things that a restaurant needs, adequately, whether it's, repairing the stove or the blender at one end to, understanding how payroll works and taxes and making sure that my food cost is A+ all the time. And
were you making a list of things that you needed to learn? Like, how are you tracking with the lessons you need to learn to be able to own your own place sometime?
Well, a lot of that is from listening to other restaurateurs or chefs, gripe about how and why that they're failing. So when anyone would say, "Oh man, we just got our butts handed to us from this or whatever," and I had no idea about the tax filing deadline for blah blah blah, my eyebrows would rise, my ears prick up, like, I need to be listening to that, right? So part of it is that, and then part of it is embracing my own failures along the way, like a particularly bad service happens. And then really dive into exactly why did that happen, or that I'm not training a staff member. Like my training of this staff member is not really successful and they're not really getting it. So and then taking a step back and instead of being willful and, kind of pigheaded about like, well, I told him 6 times, instead like think to ask the question, hey, how do you learn? It seems like my teaching isn't working, right?
Yeah.
And how do you want me to tell you this? How do we make it to the place that we're looking to make it to?
Yeah,
right?
Or the conversation, like, I've done everything I know how to do to get you to where you are, and you're still not there. Are you on the wrong path? Is there, like, can I help you get on the right path? Like, am I doing you a disjustice by giving you a paycheck when you could be excelling someplace else? You know, like, those are the questions you learn to recognize these things, right?
Oh yeah.
So, and it's just like learning on somebody else's dollar, failing on somebody else's dollar, right?
Yeah, and and fortunately, none of those places went out of business. So the failures were all compartmentalized, or whatever. And then after a time of this resort, I decided that I really loved living in Colorado. And so then I started to think about what it would be like to open a restaurant in Colorado as opposed to going back to San Francisco. And we worked on a partnership with the owners of the resort that they would help fund. They would give us a loan to fund the opening of our restaurant. And we worked towards that,
This is interesting, because a lot of we spend time on the show talking about how to get the actual capital, how to get the funding. I think this is a really interesting approach. I mean, you give 8 years of your life to somebody, right?
Yep.
Good relationships. How do you exit a situation leaving with such good morale and what's the word? Just the friendship, the relationship, that relationship. How do you leave that relationship in a way that isn't just intact but is funding your next project? Like,
right.
What was your secret to that?
Well, I mean, it's there's a unique circumstance that happened for me, but I think that there's a general principle that kind of works universally for many, or would work for many people. So Alice and Carl, the owners of the resort, wanted to sell the resort. They were done with hospitality. They wanted to move into the next new thing. And they when they announced it to the staff that the resort was going to sell, there was kind of an exodus of staff. And so, and we're great friends, and they're really spectacular people to work for and with. And so we decided, kind of as a group, they asked, and Jill and I said yes, to stick around and steward the resort until it's sold. And then, as a thank you, they would, co-sign a loan, or they would loan us the money directly, or, however that would end up working out. And, fortunately, we had a lot of friendship, and we had a lot of trust with Alice and Carl because they're great people. And interestingly, it took 2 years from that point for the resort to sell.
Did you work in an interest deal or anything like that?
No, we didn't. But but it was, it ended up being worth it. Well, in the end, like, looking back at it today, it was perfectly worth it. But I think the universal idea is that when individuals in hospitality make themselves indispensable, you work really hard, you try really hard, you're really, really focused. You pull more than your weight, in the restaurant. You solve more problems than you create, over time. When you're indispensable, it's recognized.
You got to give before you get. You got to be that person that's willing to give all this energy, this time, this level of excellence, and it will come back some way, somehow. Somebody's going to recognize your hustle, your what's the word? I guess you're worthy of your worthiness, right?
Yep.
Like, you got to earn it. You can't just expect it to happen. You got to give before you get, and you gave everything to this couple in their resort. Like, of course they're going to recognize you, right? Of course they're going to, that the universe is paying attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that I'm very fortunate that is how it worked out for Jill and me. And of course, Jill and I were super frugal, and we saved up our nickels, as well. So it wasn't like Alice and Carl just handed us a restaurant or whatever. We really did.
Was it fully funded?
No, they didn't fully fund.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a very much a partnership.
Okay.
But they covered all the gaps. Right?
Okay.
And
are
we
you
were
still
able to
partners
open-
to this day, or did you pay off their percentage?
We have a little bit left to pay, but we make our
Almost there, though.
almost there, our steady process.
Awesome.
And we've kept the banks out of it, which has been awesome. It has really
Beautiful.
been spectacular as well. And I think it is. I think it's a way that most people probably should approach restaurants. When it happens that way, generally, I think the restaurants are more successful. The operators, the people doing it, have learned. They've made the mistakes. They've figured everything out. They really know up from down. When a restaurant just gets plunked in your lap, then there's a lot of opportunity to make mistakes.